gonna start to record. I'm gonna share my screen. Right, that's our blockchain. Chat. All right, so here we are. So I'm basically gonna show you how to connect the back end to the front end. So I have two folders here I created. I have server, which has all of our Node.js, Socket.io, and all that jazz in there. It can even have the server-side rendering file, which is the index.html that you may have used for your socket chat. So that doesn't change. That stays there. What I added on top of that is another folder where all of my React lives. So you can treat this as two different applications in a way. They are two different applications. They reside in the same project, but they're going to be running on different ports, and you can treat them separately. The mistake would be to try to mix them all together, and that's where some of the problems are. So cleanly separate them out and cleanly have them running on different ports, because that's going to be a pain point for you. If they're running on the same port, it's going to be a problem, right? So let's go back to the we are inside of Socket.io. And we want to go to the server. So that's going to be just our node server that we have kind of refreshed ourselves on. Inside of that, we have that page that loads, and then we don't really need it for this purpose because we're not doing anything with it. We have our server.js or app.js, what have you. We have our model, node modules, package.json, right? Package.json has a few dependencies: Express, Mongoose, and Socket.io. You may add more. You may add body parser, which is for posting. Body parser, if you want to do the admin login, you'd have to post, and you'd have to grab the body, which would be username, password. Socket.io, of course, is a socket library you use. Mongoose is the wrapper across MongoDB. Express is our API. Again, you might want to use more. There's a lot more out there. If you do security, you could do passport.js. You could use logging with Morgan. There's a whole bunch of packages you could use with that. But so anyhow, what I did first is, because I wanted to clean up my code a little bit better, I extracted a lot of Socket.io stuff into a new folder called socket.js. And for now, I have all my socket information there. And I haven't exported that, but you would export that out and use it as a library in your server.js. So I'm just kind of making this file a little cleaner because this can grow very large over time. This can be, you can put everything in there. It'd be like a 5,000 line file. I don't want that. I want a nice clean file. Couple things a little different. Because we have Express, we don't necessarily need to go through that big setup of HTTP create server. We kind of, first step is we pull in Express, and then we instantiate a new version of Express, set a port, and then using that HTTP server, we create the server with Express kind of bound to it. So we can do it in that one line. So we basically are creating the server with Express attached. So the web server is ready. Remember, the Socket.io server is a TCP/IP layer, and the HTTP server is now ready for requests. But we are going through Express now, so now we're wiring it all up, and it's going to sit and listen. Now we're going to trigger Express to listen on this port. So when the server starts up, Express is listening on that port, and we're all good. So we're ready for requests now. So that's a little bit of a different setup, but it's a couple lines of code again. It's very small. Next step, we do our MongoDB setup. Again, you could extract some of this out and make this file even smaller, but we're leaving it in here. So that's all good. So now we know from this point that our server will start up, our Express will start up, our Mongoose will connect. And when we start it, we'll get some information, some good feedback on that, hopefully. We go through and we set our models up. Now, this is probably older code. I don't really need this now anymore, so I can get rid of that. And so then what we do is we kind of dig into Express and set some credentials on the Express. So this is important. You're going to need this. So this part here is the cores, right? You're doing custom middleware before it starts up. And you're saying every request, every response that I'm going to give back basically is allowing this cross origin response. So this is adding it to my responses now. And then I'm going next in the pipeline. So that allows that when the request comes in from localhost from React, that my server, who is also on localhost now, is going to say, okay, well, I'm allowing that across the same, because there can be different types of hacking and things like that can happen across there. So we're basically allowing that. Without this, you would be dead in the water, to be honest, because you wouldn't understand why your front end cannot talk to the back end. So this is very important. When you have a distributed system where you might have React on one server like Heroku, and maybe you have you have your Node.js deployed, I don't know, on Amazon Web Services or something like that, you won't run into this kind of thing because they're different domains, they're different hosts, right? Different origins. After we set that up, then we start getting into our routers using Express. So we're saying, I just did one. So all I did is I said, I'm just doing that orders one that I talked about a long time ago, where you can book an order in restaurants. So I have my orders. Inside of this file, I'm creating a router that has, I'm just loading this file up. So this is gonna load it up, and I'm gonna say using Express, anything that comes in under /orders is gonna go through this router. And this router is gonna handle it. So in for your project, you're gonna have a chat router, and you're gonna have an event log router or something like that. I started building out restaurants, but then I left it. So what does the routes look like? So I have a folder called routes. And again, I still have my model from Mongoose, right? That hasn't changed. That's still there from when we did that lab, one of the labs we did, where we're calling socket.io. So our routes, so I added an index. We don't need to look at that. Basically, that handles the index.html. If somebody so choose, I'll look at that. Why not? Basically, it says use a router and on just slash like the root return index.html. Just return it. That could be your chat window, just to show that hey, it's coming from the server. It's still there. It's not necessarily going through React, but from React, we wouldn't really we'll call this. It would be if somebody called the server directly and triggered that. We still conserve it. So an order route. So what I did is you need Express right away again. Then you need to call the router. And I'm not using var. I'm using the ES6 const. And then I require my order model. The model looks the same as the Mongoose model. Has the schema and exposes the model to the world. This is important. Remember modules.export. Going back, if you don't do this for your router, your model, or any library or module you create, you're not going to see it. So you need to do that. I even ran into that problem the other day because I forgot about it. I created this file, and at the bottom I didn't export it. I'm like, I can't understand why I'm getting some errors. It's because I didn't export the router, which means that this guy would fail because he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There is no router. There is a file, but it's not exporting an object when I expect an object. So you need to export that. Don't forget it. So then you just create your routes, right? So you use your router and you use a GET request. So this will come in on /orders now. Somebody types in localhost, port, whatever I have, 5,000 or whatever I have as a GET request. It's going to hit this because if you see this, it's serving at /orders. So this is saying it's going to be the base root /orders. Callback with a next. This keyword is for middleware, so that again you can go to the next keyword, which ironically we're not using, to be honest. So we probably could get rid of that if we wanted to. It's just there in case you needed to do something, I believe. Console log quickly that it is happening. So I mean, you could start off and just do this and just make sure that your endpoints are being hit from the front end, or using Postman that we talked about. And then I'm just calling Mongoose, find everything. So for what you guys will do is just grab all the chats, and then using this find command, you can output them. I tried to do some mapping here, but you just for my own self, but you don't need to do that. So you can actually say, in the response, again, I'm adding the header type. It's going to be JSON. So I'm telling the front end, I'm going to give you a JSON result in our markup, and then I'm going to stringify that result. And then I added another one here, and I didn't use the next, but I said by ID. So now this is coming in order/ID, and then I'm getting one. Now I just start adding this. You could add post, you could add delete if you wanted to. We did CRUD operations in the daytime full-time course, so they had to do update, edit, and delete. So then you would need posts and put and all those things. And you would need another middleware called body parser that you would add in here. And that's basically it for the server for this example. So I would probably most likely just do node-man.js and kickstart that. Cross my fingers again, it starts up in a live demo, right? And then we go back to this and refresh it. Hopefully it comes back with the same amount of data. as it is loading. Cue the music. Let's see if it's taking a little while to serve up. It says orders started on localhost 5000, order get request receive. So it hit this endpoint here and it might fail. It may fail. If you don't know why, well, let's go back and try to remember. It's because I did not kickstart my local MongoDB, so that's a problem. So it's going to fail. That daemon, right? Another step you need to remember if you're doing locally. All right, so where was it again? It was in my program files. It was in somewhere in here. MongoDB, right? We go to the server, we go to the bin, and then we kickstart that daemon right here. So that'll kickstart and run and make sure that, again, is it going to run? There it is. Kickstart's listening now. And this should respond better now. Let's see. So it's probably failing. Mongoose could not connect. So let's refresh it again because we need these orders in order to go forward. Let's see what happens now. It's going to try, it requested it. Now it's going to try to trigger it. Cross our fingers that it is actually working. Who knows now that I kickstarted it late. Let's see here. It's chugging along. So who knows? I may have to restart my Node.js now that it's, and I may need to restart it because maybe the connection, it didn't connect properly. So maybe I'll do that. Let's start this again. Now that it's running in the background, it says it's kickstarted. And let's see here. Somebody is chatting with me. Why did we use Socket.io? Why did we use Socket.io? We use Socket.io. We use Socket.io to collect all the data, right? Now we're exposing the data. That's why. Your assignment was more, yeah, so there you go, return. So we use Socket.io to collect the data, and then in the full project, again, if you want to go ahead and do it, is they still keep the chat going, and they wrap the chat in a guest view in React, and then you have the chat working as a guest view, and then you collect all the data. And then if you want to be an administrator logs in, and he can go and see what's happening in the chat that's live, and he can go and disable rooms and enable rooms, and he can do some things, some settings. So when the guests hit the chat, some things are restricted and things like that. That's the full project. You guys are just getting the smaller scaled down version of, hey, I collected all this information from Socket.io in my database. Now part 2 is I'm going to display it, right? So I kind of scaled down all those pieces, but the full application had all the pieces working together. So that's why Socket.io, I kind of moved it to the to its own manager here and didn't include it because right now I'm just after the data that we collected already. So now we know that that is actually running, right? So we have it on this. So this is a GET request. Now we want to fire up our React. So how you would do that is, this is another important step, is you have to kick off a new terminal window, right? Because now you're dealing with this separate application. And you need to go into the client. And you could have many different clients. You could have an Angular project running. You could have a .NET running, not .NET project, doesn't matter, because you have an endpoint. So you could have many clients. So I'm going into my React app, and I'm going to see where I'm at here with it. And I believe I just have to do npm run start. Cross my fingers. It's supposed to load up on another port. So we can say that we can trust, and we can switch back and forth between those two. I have a couple more windows open, so you got to dig for it. 3 is, okay, so 3 is my Node.js and 4 is my front-end React. So React's going to kick that off. So what I did differently, and I don't know if it's any different, but I just created, I just pretended like we were hitting backend GitHub or JSON placeholder Tippy code, right? Just using Axios. That's all I did, because now I have an endpoint. Now I can build it out as I normally would, right? I have a couple setup items where I just I added Axios to my project. So if we look at the dependencies, Axios is there. My deployment setup is setting up. So see if that probably won't show up for some reason on Edge. It's giving me a little bit of a problem. But it should look like this. So let's post it on 3000. Take a look at that, and cross our fingers that that also loads up. Should actually load up. Still starting. So what we'll look at that while it's chugging is I just created a component called orders.js, and in my app.js I included that component. Now you'll do a little bit more because you're going to have a router and you're going to have a couple more components, right? Orders.js, I just treat it like we did in our lab, but this time I used hooks. So there you go. I'm outputting all of my orders: Tony Soprano salami sandwich, and then all these guys, right? TikTok liver and onions. I only tried that once. It's actually awful. But anyhow, some people like it. I just created one component, and I use hooks, and I used the use effect and use state. I imported Axios, and then right away, I set up state for orders. In my use effect, which is component did mount, I go and fetch them, and then I call my endpoint, localhost 5000 orders, and then I return the data and I set state, set the orders, which in turn will update my component, and then I go through and I render them, right? So you may run into one small problem. You may get an error, a little message saying each component needs its own key, because a component, so you can actually add a key as the order ID. Basically, that's allowing you to have multiple components of the same name, so React knows there's a little difference between each one of them. If you have 100 components, it needs to have some kind of identifier on it. So key equals order ID. So that key is actually pretty important, right there, that line. And I just output the data from the back end, because I know I'm getting JSON in the back end. I know if I look at my dev tools that's where we're at. So I think I console log it somewhere when I do the request somewhere. There you go. But you'll see it's kind of an object, right? It's like object coming back. If you dig into the network tab, and again, if we refresh this again, maybe we'll see the call coming in here somewhere. I think it's going to be somewhere in there. Orders. There we go. And we look at that response, and we see that that's all JSON object that we're looking for, and we are only returning a few of those things. It doesn't have a wrapper on it, but you just trust that it has a lot more in there. I think it has orders and item, and it has the ID, and that's the JSON object. And then we look at the header. It comes back as a GET request. Okay, coming from the server again. If you don't have that piece, now maybe let's quickly try to do that. Let's see what will happen. So if we just take this out, comment it out, or whatever, we'll toggle this line. Let's see what happens when it rebuilds, right? Let's see. So it should rebuild. Node.mod's picking that up. So now if we go, who knows? Maybe it will work just because it wants to work now, but let's refresh this page. Let's clear out our console log, clear this out, refresh that. And it worked. It's probably because it's caching. But anyhow, you will get, in some cases, you'll get a CORS error, and maybe not. Maybe when you're developing, you don't need that. But I've run across many times where you'll get this CORS error, right? So maybe if I change the URL somehow, I'll break it for you while I'm not live, to be honest. But you'll get a CORS error, and if it doesn't, you'll see something like this. You will get 404 not found, and you'll get a whole bunch of errors. Now maybe it's all well and good. You won't run into that error, and that's perfectly fine. But just know that when you get more advanced and stuff, you will run into that. So that's kind of like what you'll run into. All right, so I'm going to drop off for a second, and Tian's going to come on in about 2 minutes, hopefully, maybe 5, and he's going to talk to you about blockchain. So I'll stop right there and just have a break, and then hopefully you can ask me any questions that you want. All right.